Hey everyone, this is Michael again, and welcome to the Monday Night Raw review. And tonight's Raw was from the TD Garden in Boston, Massachusetts. And we are 11 days away until WrestleMania. And I gotta say, tonight's Raw, as you all know, another week of Raw, another shitty show it was. Tonight's Raw was fucking shitty. As always. I mean, what's there to say about Raw every week? It's been nothing but shitty. So, but anyways, let's get on with the review. So the show opened up with Ronda Rousey coming out. She ends up saying, for the first time ever, women are going to be the main event at WrestleMania. And yes, it was announced today by WWE. It was announced this morning that the women are going to be main eventing WrestleMania for the first time. And it's going to be, of course, Ronda versus Becky versus Charlotte for the Raw Women's Championship. So yeah, so it's going to be the first ever time at WrestleMania in WrestleMania history that the women are going to be main eventing. So, you know, I'm pretty happy about that. So yeah, so Ronda ended up saying that. And she ends up saying to the crowd, she has one thing to say: you're welcome. And so she drops the mic, and looks like, you know, she was going to go out of the ring, but she's like, you know, I gotta say one more thing. She ends up picking up the mic again. She ends up saying that she has something else to say. She says she has a promise to the fans, and that she is going to make Charlotte and Becky tap out at the same time at WrestleMania. And so she ends up dropping the mic. Looked like, you know, she was going to get out of the ring, but once again, she's like, then she ends up picking up the mic again. She also says she has no idea what a beat the clock challenge is. And so that's what Raw kicked off with. We had a beat the clock challenge. And so Ronda ended up taking on Sarah Logan. Before it got underway, Becky Lynch ends up coming out. Because before that we had the Riott Squad come out. You know, Ruby Riott, Liv Morgan, Sarah Logan. So after they came out, Becky Lynch ended up coming out. She ended up getting on the mic. She ends up saying that it's good to be back in Boston. She ends up saying to Ronda to stop being a weirdo. She ends up saying that Ronda came in here with her big money contract and the world ended up yawning. She says, given every advantage out there, but still, nobody gave a damn until the man came around. She says she saved her title run and just makes her better. And that's why they're the main event at WrestleMania. And she ends up saying, you know, Ronda knows this ends with, you know, Becky holding up the title above her head. So Charlotte ends up coming out. Charlotte says the main event isn't because of either Ronda or Becky. She says, you know, but rather she's done over these past 7 years. And that's why she's been handpicked to be the main event of WrestleMania. And that's how you know, it ended with both of them, you know, on the mic. So then we had the match get underway. Ronda Rousey versus Sarah Logan, beat the clock challenge. And pretty much by the way, this was all of the beat the clock challenge. So Ronda ended up taking on Sarah Logan first. And pretty much this was basically very, very short. Ronda ended up defeating Sarah Logan, ended up locking in the armbar on Sarah Logan. Sarah Logan ended up tapping out. And Ronda stopped the clock at 1 minute and 25 seconds. So now it was up to Charlotte or Ruby Riott or Becky Lynch or Liv Morgan to beat that 125 mark. So then Charlotte ended up taking on Ruby Riott. Basically, it was short. This was another short match. And this whole Beat the Clock challenge, I thought it was very rushed. Like, they could have had, if you remember years ago when they did the Beat the Clock challenge, they would have one match here, and then later on the show, they would do another Beat the Clock, challenge match, for the other superstar to beat that time. But here it was just, oh yeah, we're gonna have Beat the Clock challenge here. Ronda beats Sarah Logan in 1 minute and 25 seconds. So yeah, let's just do Charlotte versus Ruby Riott and then Becky versus Liv Morgan, all there. So it was very rushed. So Charlotte and Ruby Riott. Charlotte didn't end up, neither one of them didn't end up beating the clock. And so that's when Becky Lynch and Liv Morgan got in. For Becky Lynch and Liv Morgan got their challenge, Charlotte ended up blasting Becky with the big boot. So now we had Becky Lynch and Liv Morgan. Becky Lynch ended up beating the time. She ended up defeating Liv Morgan with a roll-up in 7 seconds. So Becky Lynch ended up being Liv Morgan, ended up beating Ronda Rousey's time. So, but all in all, I felt this Beat the Clock challenge was rushed. This could have been done like how the way they did it back then, where, like I said, they had the Beat the Clock challenge, and whoever set that time for one of the superstars to beat, have them go at it later on the show. But no, it was just all thrown together to rush it. That was basically what happened tonight with this Beat the Clock challenge. And then after that, we had Finn Balor versus Bobby Lashley and Jinder Mahal. This was a 2-on-1 handicap match. Originally, it was supposed to be Balor versus Lashley and Lio Rush. But before the match got underway, Lio Rush ended up coming out on the mic. And he ended up saying to Balor, his road to WrestleMania goes through him and Bobby Lashley. And that it's not a road Finn wants to be on. Finn Balor wants to be on. Lio Rush ends up saying to Balor that he should have quit when he should. And that he's ahead when he should, because he's ahead. And Rush says now Balor's going to be forced to leave as a broken, beaten, hot piece of garbage, which he ends up saying he's going to be like Rob Growinski, and the crowd end up booing at that. So yeah, so Lio Rush ended up mentioning Rob Gronkowski, and he ends up saying as much as he liked to end Balor's WrestleMania dreams, Lio Rush ends up saying that he's not medically cleared to compete tonight because of what happened last week with Strowman, and up tossing Lio Rush around. And he ends up saying that Lashley won't be teaming with him tonight. So it was revealed to be Jinder Mahal. And so then we had the match, the 2-on-1 handicap match. Balor versus Lashley and Jinder Mahal. And this was a who gives a shit match. Like, didn't care for this match. This match was garbage. Of course, you had the Singh brothers interfere with Balor, and Lio Rush tried to interfere. But Finn Balor ended up getting the win. Coup de grace on Jinder Mahal, and that was that. This garbage match. Fucking garbage. Then you had, after the match, Bobby Lashley ends up taking out the Singh brothers, both of the Singh brothers, and he ends up spearing Jinder Mahal. So that was that, but it was garbage. It's a piece of shit. And then we had, oh my god. Yes, we had Elias. Oh, I'm sorry, Borlias. He was in Times Square. He was in the city. And he ends up talking about how many iconic artists have performed in New York City. He says he's going to give the greatest performance in history at WrestleMania. Yeah, more like it's going to be a snooze performance. He ends up saying he takes the credit for all the people being in Times Square, and he goes to start. We see him, start playing his guitar, and Elias asks, if guy comes up, he plays guitar, and Elias asks if he can sing. And so this guy ends up starting to sing. Elias ends up cutting him off, and he ends up calling him untalented, and he ends up shooing this guy away. But boring. And this is not the last we see of Elias tonight. Not the last we see of Borlias. Then we had Ricochet and Aleister Black versus the Revival. And this was a decent tag team match. Of course, Ricochet and Aleister Black, very entertaining. And sucks once again the Revival end up losing because Ricochet and Aleister Black win. Aleister Black ends up hitting the Black Mask to the Revival, to Dash Wilder and Scott Dawson. And that's when Ricochet ended up going up top, ended up hitting the 630 on Dash Wilder to score the win for him and Aleister Black. And so Ricochet and Aleister Black win it. And then we saw Scott Dawson. He was telling ring announcer that we're still the tag team champions, because this was, of course, a non-title match. And so ring announcer ends up saying, and still your Raw tag team champions, the Revival. But I gotta say, it was a decent tag team match. Then we had Drew McIntyre end up coming out. He says he doesn't give a damn if we like him, but we will respect him. He ends up going on to say that 1 week is a long time to wait for an answer from Roman Reigns. That he's a bit nervous about the answer. And so he ends up showing a clip of what happened 2 weeks ago when he took out Roman, where he ended up hitting 2 Claymore kicks on the outside. And the last Claymore kick that he hit, he rammed Roman into the ring post. And then he ended up showing his promo from last week, issuing Roman a challenge. And after it was over, McIntyre ended up saying that he hopes Roman's wife or one of his extended family got through to his mind to just say no to accepting this challenge. And McIntyre says he's already vanquished the Shield. He exterminated Dean Ambrose, and he ended up beating the #1 contender to the Universal Championship, Seth Rollins. And he says he knows what the superstar, what Roman wants to say. Yes, I never turned down the challenges, what he thinks that Roman would say. And he says he wants to appeal to Joe, the man, to think of his family. And so he's here. McIntyre says he's out here and he'll stand here all night until he gets an answer, and that he's going to hold Raw hostage. So then Roman Reigns ends up coming out. Yes, Roman was here tonight. He ends up getting in the ring, and he has a face-to-face with McIntyre. And Roman says that he accepts McIntyre's challenge. And he ends up saying he wants McIntyre to listen clearly, because what's next doesn't come from Roman. And this was kind of Joe Anoa'i speaking to McIntyre. He ends up telling McIntyre to never run his mouth about his wife and kids. And so Roman ends up hitting McIntyre, and he ends up beating him down, ends up throwing McIntyre into the ring post, and he then ends up putting McIntyre back in the ring. And then we just see McIntyre ends up low blowing Roman, and we see Roman, trying to get up, trying to recover. And then McIntyre just ends up hitting a Claymore kick to Roman. And that's how the segment ended. So yeah, so now we're going to get Drew McIntyre. Sorry about that, but I was saying, it's official now. We are getting McIntyre versus Roman at WrestleMania. And then we saw McIntyre. He was walking backstage. Dean Ambrose ends up coming up to him. As you all know, 2 weeks ago, both McIntyre and Ambrose had their Falls Count Anywhere match, which McIntyre ended up winning. And so Ambrose ends up asking, what called him a cockroach? Did he exterminate him? And he says he doesn't feel exterminated, so why not give it one more try tonight? And that is have a last man standing match. McIntyre says to Ambrose, he doesn't know how Ambrose is standing right now, and he promises he won't be after tonight. So that was that little backstage segment. So we had Drew McIntyre versus Dean Ambrose once again. It was the main event. It's last man standing match. So we had them go at it again tonight. And so then we had Sasha Banks versus Natalya. This was a typical women's match. We had Bayley and Beth Phoenix outside. And Nia Jax and Tamina end up coming out. They end up taking out Bayley at ringside, outside. Then Tamina ended up coming into the ring. She ended up super kicking Sasha, which gave Sasha the win by disqualification. So they hit the ring, and Natalya ends up out of the ring. Beth Phoenix comes in, and she ends up hitting the glam slam on Tamina. And so that's basically what happened. So all in all, Sasha versus Natalya, typical women's match. Nothing special, nothing great happened here. Then we had the Hart Foundation Hall of Fame induction. It was a video package, and it was announced earlier today that the Hart Foundation is going into the Hall of Fame. It's going to be only Bret Hart and the late great Jim the Anvil Neidhart. Of course, Owen Hart and Brian Pillman and British Bulldog aren't going in with them. It's just going to be, of course, like I said, Bret Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart, because of the legal issues with Owen Hart's widow, Martha Hart. So Bret Hart is going to be a two-time Hall of Fame inductee, which is cool. So it was a good video package showcasing the Hart Foundation, of course Bret Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. And it showed when the video package was over, Natalya ended up, crying. And it was really it was really sad seeing that because it was her father, but you could tell that she was happy that he's going into the Hall of Fame. So, but yeah, it was a good video package for the Hart Foundation. Then we had Charlie Caruso. She was interviewing Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle says he appreciates Samoa Joe coming to Raw tonight to compete, and it was announced earlier today that Kurt Angle was going to be taking on Samoa Joe. One of Kurt Angle's final matches. And he says his farewell tour is about leaving on his terms. He says he's been honored to compete against Apollo Crews and Chad Gable. And he says he'll be ready for Baron Corbin come WrestleMania. And yes, it's still happening. Kurt Angle versus Baron Corbin at WrestleMania. Even, the outcry from the fans saying that they don't want this match to take place, that they want, John Cena, which is the better option. And I fully agree with that. I fully agree that John Cena should be Kurt Angle's final opponent. Well, unfortunately, WWE is still going this route to have Kurt Angle versus Baron Corbin at WrestleMania. But Kurt Angle says it's his last match ever in Boston. And so Baron Corbin ends up coming up and says that he appreciates this farewell tour and to needle Kurt Angle about being old. And he ends up telling the fans only to cheer because they feel sorry for him and that he's half the man that he used to be. And Corbin says he can see the headlines now. Former Olympic gold medalist, disgraces himself in his last match. And so Kurt Angle then leaves with a "screw you." And that's how the interview ended. But it was an okay interview with Kurt Angle. Then we had another interview. Charlie Caruso ended up interviewing Sasha Banks and Bayley. Sasha Banks says they would take on any team, any brand, any time. She ends up saying if teams want to come for them, so it's gonna for them. So it was announced that it's going to be a fatal 4-way at WrestleMania for the Women's Tag Team Championships. It's going to be Bayley and Sasha versus the Iconics versus Nia Jax and Tamina versus Natalya and Beth Phoenix. So that's happening for WrestleMania. It's officially announced. So it's pretty obvious that Bayley and Sasha are probably going to retain the Women's Tag Team Championships. So, I know that for a fact. And so then we had Alexa Bliss. She was out there for her moment of bliss or moment of piss. And she says she doesn't know what it is when she was announced as the host of WrestleMania. She keeps on saying that the show keeps getting better and better. And she talks about how the women are main eventing WrestleMania for the first time. And she ends up welcoming her guest, her first guest, who is Braun Strowman. So Braun Strowman ends up coming out. Alexa ends up saying to Strowman, recounting some of his many great feats of strength. And she asks him what would happen to Colin Jost and Michael Che if they got these hands. And so Strowman says when he saw the car that they gave him, the only thing that he thought about was smashing Colin Jost's pasty face. And so then we had Alexa Bliss. She ends up introducing Michael Che and Colin Jost, which they were by satellite because they were in the SNL studios, which is of course in 30 Rock. And Colin Jost ends up talking about how he made a dumb mistake last time. And he says that it turns out to be some kind of sports hat, thing that blows past him. And Colin Jost ends up wearing, a Yankees cap, which the Boston crowd end up booing. We end up hearing them cheer, Yankees suck, because we all know here in New York, the New York sports teams, we end up, the New York sports teams here, sports fans, they end up hating, the Boston fans. The Boston fans hate us for the sports teams, but so that's what the Boston crowd were cheering. And so Michael Che says, he respects the hell out of Braun Strowman, but that Strowman ended up crossing the line by jacking Colin up and defending him by saying that he's a good guy. And Colin agrees and says that he was being sincere when he said on Twitter that he wants to mentor Strowman before claiming, that his parents paid millions to get him on the women's cross-country team there. And so he says he offers to teach Strowman to chew food and do his taxes before, guessing that, he's 5'11" and 180 pounds. And Michael Che says, that he's not helping and that he just wants to make it right. And so Colin Jost asks, Braun Strowman if he's ever considered therapy, and says he ends up saying that all he wants is Strowman to be paid, for Strowman to be paid, pay him back for the car, and to get an autograph from his favorite wrestler, who is Brock Lesnar. And I'm like, oh God, favorite wrestler Brock Lesnar. Oh God. And so Strowman says he wants to make this right when Colin Jost enters the 6th annual Andre the Giant Battle Royal in memory of Andre the Giant. And so Colin ends up scoffing at that. And Strowman says if he doesn't enter the match, he'll just hunt him down backstage. And because, you know, Colin Jost and Michael Che are going to be the guest correspondents for WrestleMania. And Michael Che ends up accepting the offer for Colin and says, you know, if there's any choice, if there's any chance, you know, something bad happens in the Battle Royal. And, you know, he's like, something, you know, but something bad will happen, as, you know, Michael Che probably, you know, said, as what Michael Che said. And so Colin ends up saying, he ends up trying to get Michael Che also to compete in the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal. And Strowman ends up going to Alexa to make it happen. And so Alexa ends up making the match official. So Michael Che and Colin Jost are going to be in the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal at WrestleMania. And Strowman ends up telling them that if they try to duck the match, he'll find them on the streets of New York and beat them up anyway. So, and that's how the segment ended. That's how Moment of Piss ended. But this was very boring. This was very boring. I didn't even really care for it. I didn't give a shit. So, and then once again we saw Elias. He was in front of Madison Square Garden, which he ends up calling Madison Square Garden a dump. He says he sold it out 3 times, and he's just taking a break with some tea for his vocal cords. And we see a man come by. He ends up dropping a coin into Elias's cup, because Elias ended up having a cup. And Elias ends up taking out the coin, and he complains about it, you know, being a quarter at first. And then he gives it a look. So that was that. And so then we had also, get to it with my notes, we had Baron Corbin versus Apollo Crews. And this pretty much was a boring match. This was a boring match. It was back and forth between them. Baron Corbin ended up getting the win. End of days on Apollo Crews. Boring match. Then you had, after the match, Corbin ends up hitting another end of days to Apollo Crews. So that was basically what happened. Then we had Seth Rollins. He ended up coming out and he ended up saying Brock Lesnar and him are not cut from the same cloth, and the 2 roads they are taking at WrestleMania are not different. He says he wants that weight and wants to be a champion that inspires people. He says, you know, guys like Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, Ric Flair, Triple H, John Cena, they inspire people. And he says Brock doesn't inspire people. And it goes without saying that this is the biggest match of his entire career. He says, Seth says he wanted this for a long, long time. But up until recently, he didn't realize how important this match is to all of us, to all the fans. He says yesterday he had an autograph signing in Boston, and every single person that came up to him, they all said the same thing, and that is to beat Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania. And he says that hit him in the heart, because he said he's going to win and do everything he can to make it happen. And he says now he feels like he doesn't have a choice. He says he refuses to let Brock be the champion that defines the future of this industry. And he says in 13 days, he's going to get in the ring with that bully. But what Lesnar doesn't understand is that with an army behind him, he's unstoppable. Oh, so I said we were 11 days until WrestleMania. It's actually 13. Sorry about that. I messed up. And he ends up saying that in 13 days he's going to get in the ring with that bully. And what Brock Lesnar doesn't understand is that with an army behind him, he's unstoppable. And so then Paul Heyman ends up coming out. He says he appreciates being informed that it's now a handicap match. It's going to be Brock Lesnar against Seth Rollins and the entire WWE universe. Okay. In the entire WWE universe. And he says, Paul Heyman says he likes the odds. And he assures Seth his chances of winning are 0. He asks if he realized how pathetic he sounds. That's how pathetic Seth Rollins sounds. Needing the fans' love and support and affirmation. Paul Heyman says he knows how Seth's generation is. And he says, what's next? Seth needs our thoughts and prayers. And Seth ends up laughing at Heyman and says he's got it all wrong. And that he's not asking for thoughts and prayers. He's here to answer them. And of course at this, Seth Rollins ends up walking up the ramp. And then Paul Heyman ends up getting freaked out. He's like, oh, I'm just an advocate. I'm just an advocate. Brock Lesnar told me to come out and say that and say all this. And so that's when Seth said, that Heyman's got it all wrong. And, he's not that Seth is not asking for thoughts and prayers, which he's here to answer that, but he's here to answer them. He says, Seth ends up telling Heyman that we are going to WrestleMania. We are going to beat Brock Lesnar, and we are going to march into Suplex City and burn it down, as the fans chanted that. And so then we had Kurt Angle end up making his entrance. What was really funny was, as the fans were chanting, "You suck," Kurt Angle was pointing to Paul Heyman. That was really funny. With the crowd chanting "You suck," and Kurt ends up pointing at Paul Heyman. So then we had Kurt Angle versus Samoa Joe. And before the match, Joe ended up coming out. He ended up getting on the mic. And he ends up saying to Kurt that he begs him for forgiveness. But he forgot the flowers. He says that he's not a very sentimental person. And he knows all these mouth breathers want it. But it will be a cold day in the afterlife before he lets Kurt Angle ride into the sunset. He says, no, he brings a very different gift tonight. He says, because it's WrestleMania season and for Kurt's last night in Boston, he has a very special gift. And that is a good night's sleep. And he says he couldn't think of a better way to say goodbye than putting Kurt's ass to sleep one last time. And, Kurt Angle and Samoa Joe, they probably had a lot of matches in TNA, but this was their very first match in WWE. First time these guys competed together in WWE. And the match itself, it was okay. It was back and forth between Angle and Joe. There was a point where Joe end up blocking in the Coquina Clutch on Kurt Angle, and Kurt Angle ended up dropping, and Kurt Angle ended up pinning Samoa Joe. So Kurt Angle ended up getting the win. All in all, match itself, it was okay. Then we had Triple H end up coming out. And Raw went to commercial. Then when it came back from commercial, Triple H was on the mic. And he says the crowd gave him a standing ovation during the break. Which, that to hear from him was cool. He goes on to say that he congratulates Becky Lynch, Ronda Rousey, and Charlotte for being the first ever women's main event at WrestleMania. And he ends up thanking all the women in the back for everything they do. Because he ends up saying that the match was not given, but it was earned. He ends up saying some things don't make him happy. He ends up taking out an envelope from his pocket, from his leather jacket pocket. And it was a letter that was given to Triple H from Batista's lawyer. And he ends up saying that it states that Batista won't compete at WrestleMania this year. Only if Triple H agrees to one more stipulation that Batista wants. And, the letter, he ends up saying the letter, is just kind of, just rambling about Batista. He says Batista says a lot of things, like how Triple H started Evolution to keep the title around his waist longer. And Triple H is like, really, Dave, you just figured that one out now? And he says Batista had a big week, realizing both that and that the moon is made out of cheese, as what Triple H ended up saying. He says Dave said Evolution did nothing for his career, but he seems to recall that before Evolution, when he was Devon's, Decon. Which, if you remember, when Batista first started in WWE, he was the manager for Devon. When Devon was the Reverend Devon, that was when he and Bubba Ray went their separate ways when they broke up. And so he mentioned that, and when he seems to recall that, that he was the world champion, or when Batista left, when he was world champion. He ends up saying that Triple H ends up says, Evolution prevented Batista from having a meaningful career. And he says 6 championships later, he only quit when he realized he couldn't beat John Cena. He ends up saying he also believes Triple H's obsession kept him from coming back after he quit the second time. But, he refused phone calls. And Triple H ends up reading the letter. The letter ends up getting to a stipulation, which Triple H reads. And Batista said, on the letter it says, if you would like me to appear, then at WrestleMania, you will give me what I want, what I really, really want. I'll tell you what I want. Of course, it's the Spice Girls lyrics to their song Wannabe, which is funny. And so he says Batista wants Triple H to put his career on the line. So Batista wants Triple H to put his career on the line. If Batista wins, Triple H will never compete in a WWE ring again. So Triple H ends up calling him out for for beating up a 7-year-old man in a lame attempt to get a match at WrestleMania. And he says he agreed to the match, and yet he sends the letter because this is what he does. He ends up saying that this is just another attempt to quit. He says he's not going to let him quit this time, and that he's going to make Batista stand up to his commitment and make him show up. And so, pretty much, that's basically what the segment was. But as I say, Triple H's segment here wasn't that good in my opinion. Wasn't that great. And so, after that, we had, once again, Elias on the street, on the New York street, talking about how when he gives this, great performance. So, we see some guy come up. He ends up stealing money out of Elias's guitar case. And Elias says, he's okay with it. And he says he's going to make a lot more money at WrestleMania. And he says, and leave no doubt in anyone's mind that WWE stands for Walk with Elias. And so the same guy ends up coming back and ends up stealing Elias's guitar case. And so Elias, didn't even notice it. But that was that. Sorry about that, but I was saying, that was the last we saw of Elias tonight. Then we had the main event. Drew McIntyre versus Dean Ambrose. Last man standing match. Match itself, it was okay. It was back and forth between McIntyre and Ambrose. McIntyre, we saw deliver a slingshot to Ambrose from underneath the ring. McIntyre was end up hitting a kendo stick to Dean Ambrose, and Ambrose ended up bringing in a table, which unfortunately McIntyre ended up driving Ambrose into it, and eventually McIntyre ended up win the match. He ended up hitting the Claymore kick to Ambrose. Ambrose didn't get up for the 10 count, so McIntyre ended up winning. And that was how Raw ended tonight. Raw ended last we saw with McIntyre standing on the top. So for 2 weeks now, McIntyre ends Raw standing tall. So, but all in all, the match itself, it was okay. So, yes, anyways, that's it for this review of tonight's Monday Night Raw. Hope you all enjoyed this review, and thank you all for watching. And definitely give this video a thumbs up, comment, subscribe. And they made some matches. They announced matches for next week's Raw, which is the go-home show for WrestleMania. They announced that it's going to be the Riott Squad, Becky Lynch, and Ronda Rousey and Charlotte in a 6-woman tag team match. Yay, are you excited? And then Kurt Angle's next opponent is going to be Rey Mysterio, as he does his farewell, tour. So that's going to be pretty cool to see Kurt Angle versus Rey Mysterio on Raw next week. So, yes, anyways, thank you all for watching, and stay tuned tomorrow night for the SmackDown review. So until then, I will see you all tomorrow night. Bye.